If you're starting out putting together any reasonable sized permaculture system or a food forest or any variant on that, you can spend an absolute fortune on plants. But a lot of them you can start from seed or cuttings. We've done a lot of that, trying to keep costs down. Because here, for example, a lot of stuff's gone out as pioneer species, and then we've gone with cuttings and seedlings and sometimes just very young plants as a way of buying them much, much cheaper, because we're going to want them in 4 or 5 years, so we've got time on our hands while the pioneer nurse crops come up, like the willow and things that we put in the shelter belt. So it doesn't have to be fancy. You know, it's easy to be intimidated by the very idea of having a tree nursery or a plant nursery, but you know, it's not anything that anyone else going to see really. It's just for your own stuff. So you can afford to be a little bit experimental as well, because if you lose some, it's just a few seeds, or I mean, it's not a massive cost. So yeah, thought I'd show you a quick look around our tree nursery. So this is Thun, Thun sinensis. It's a member of the mahogany family, I think. It's known as Chinese cedar, even though it's not a cedar at all. The leaves and the shoots have got a sort of burnt, sort of caramelized onion kind of flavour to them. It's quite pungent, but you can dry the leaves, grind them up, and use that as a spice, or you can just take the shoots. That's what they're mainly used as in China, is in the shoots for harvested and then boiled or steamed. I've not tried the shoots. The leaves are quite good. This is a good one. This is a plum yew. It's not a plum or a yew, but you can see it's got a yewish kind of quality to it. It's a bit yellow, it needs a bit of a feed, this. It produces a fruit that is meant to be a mix somewhere between pine and butterscotch, but also it's an evergreen species that loves the shade. It wants to grow in deep shade all the time. It doesn't like the sun at all. So that's a really useful thing. It's fairly slow growing. I've got about 5 or 6 of these. Didn't grow these from seed. I got these about a year ago, just tiny little things, and they seem to be doing quite well. I got loads of these. This is an Antonovka apple that's 1 year old. I stratified a load of seed in the fridge, and they moulded, so I thought I'll pull them out quick, even though they hadn't completely finished stratifying really. And some grew in the first year, and that's what these are. And then the rest of them that I just had given up on, the ones that had got mould on them, they flew up this spring, so I've got loads of them. And yeah, the interesting thing about the Antonovka is that most apples notoriously don't breed true from seed. If you plant a seed from an apple, what you get isn't really necessarily going to be anything like the parent apple. You know, you need to plant a lot of apples to get a good variety, because there's so much diversity in them. This actually breeds true from seed, more or less. It's a fairly sharp, fairly hard apple, very long lasting. It's a good keeper, which is what we've got it for. They're also used a lot for rootstocks, but I want these for just what they are, because yeah, a load of keeping apples. So my plan is that if they're a nice sharp acid apple, then we can store them in a root cellar once we've got one. But you know, seedling trees, it's going to be a while. I've got time to build it. Yeah, so we can keep them until it's time. We can make cider and then into apple cider vinegar, which is something that we use a lot of, and it'd be nice to be self-sufficient for that. Black elder, like a lot of these things, you know, elder takes so easily from cuttings that, you know, I'm not going to buy, what's that on there? Get off. I'm not going to buy, you know, 10, 15 of a plant that I like that'll take from cuttings. I'll get one, I'll bring it on, and then take cuttings from it. This is one of them. And we'll have about a dozen or so of these to the shelter belt eventually, just for, it's nice to have elderflower cordial and elderberries, of course, but these ones, being the red, give you the pink flowers, so you can get, if you're going to make a drink with them, you get the pink variant. It's just, you know, a bit of fun, a bit of variation. This is American elder, Sambucus canadensis, which of course is closer related to the European elder, but it flowers a little bit later, so they won't cross-pollinate, and it's self-sterile. So if you've only got one variant of it, one cultivar, this one, and I take cuttings of cuttings of cuttings and put as many of them as I like through the landscape. They're, of course, they're genetic clones, so I don't have to worry about cross-pollination. It's, you know, effectively the same tree. So this, because I've only got one of them, effectively, will put out flowers for easily 4 or 5 months of the year, well into autumn, and it never sets fruit because it'll never get pollen. Well, not pollen that's going to do it any good anyway. So for your pollinators, your hoverflies, bees, I mean, yeah, that's very cool. And of course it means that we can have elderflower fritters, things like that, you know, whenever we want them all summer. I haven't tried it, but it's meant to have a better flavour than the European elder. Meant to have a nicer scent to it as well. And best of all, it's not a full height tree. It'll grow to 2 to 3 meters high, and then it tends to spread and become more of a clumping form, which is perfect for us. It leaves out really early, so it's a really good cover, give us a nice bit of shelter, and because it's that height, it means that we can put it at the top of the field where it's not going to cast a huge amount of shade. It's I am really pleased with this. I'm going to use a lot of it. These are monkey puzzle trees. These are about 4 years old, I think, 4 or 5 years old. They're fairly slow growing at first. The Chilean pine, really good nut variety, but it doesn't bear fruit nut for a really long time. So I'm not likely to see it, but I'm planting them anyway. It's a full height tree, so it's going at the north end of the croft. See, I've been putting top dressing them with compost. Yeah, so I don't want to, cast a huge amount of shade over everything else. So they're going down there. You need males and females, and until they start producing nuts, or at least flowering, you really can't tell which you've got. So you've got to put plenty in. I've got 3. I will put more in. It's just more of a token thing to get some in the ground sooner rather than later. We will add more, but if you get bigger trees, they're really expensive. So I'd rather buy them like this. Interestingly, I've also seen these. There's a forest just north of Perth as you come up towards the Highlands, and they've done a lot of diversification in this forest, and in amongst it they've got like 20-30 year old monkey puzzles, which is really cool, because I say it's meant to give one of the very best nuts. So while we're at it, let's look at some of the more normal stuff. These are little chestnuts. You can see they're just coming through now. They've just been uncovered. Left them a little bit long, really. They were just a bag of nuts that I bought last year that were from, intended for consumption, but they were from a British tree. So it gives us a decent chance, it's not something that's going to fail utterly here, because, it's from Italy or whatever. And they seem to have come quite well. So for bulk planting, instead of buying seed, just buy nuts, they're nuts. And we did the same thing with these. These are my Hazels, and again, there's probably a couple of hundred, loads of them, because again, Hazel we're going to use extensively. And if you buy them as bare root trees, that it starts adding up. If you can grow them by the 100 fairly cheaply, so that's just starting to green out there. If you can buy them by the kilo for consumption, well, that's also nuts. These came from Wales, so I know they're from a fairly similar climate. Here we are. So yeah, here's the Antonovka apples that I thought had failed, so I just left them in the soil and overplanted, and then loads of them came up. So I've got quite a few of them still, and in between them, see these little tiny things? That's giant Sequoia. Now they're not for planting here, but I'm not going to say too much about that because they're for planting elsewhere, but we've got hundreds of them. So when I've been dead a couple of 100 years, someone's going to wonder where all these giant Sequoia have come from all over the north of Scotland. Here's the Antonovka that were from the first year. You can see they're just bigger and healthier. They've done quite well considering they overwintered in tiny pots, but obviously they're an East Russian variety, so they're fairly tough. Siberian pea tree, Siberian pea shrub. You can see the top growth's looking fairly healthy. These overwintered in the greenhouse, so they've had a really soft time. They've come out. They were pretty hardy for a while, but they're just now starting to show a little bit of windburn. We've had some fairly high winds. Hard as nails, very wind hardy, as you'd expect from a Siberian variety. We're using these extensively. We've got another load of seed in at the moment for Bring It On. Really easy to grow from seed, and yeah, really good. Well, they're meant to be a pioneer species, but they're so useful that we're going to be keeping them, you know, deliberately not phasing them out as they go through succession or anything. We actually want these. It's a good nitrogen fixing species that very wind hardy, very tough, and gives you an edible bean, like tiny little pea, like a lentil tree basically. And we're also I've done a video on it. We got a load of them ready. That's what these are for going to the poultry forest as a self forage species. So yeah, they're really good plants. Going to use a lot more of them. Next to it, we've got the mulberry that are just starting to leaf out now, quite late here. And again, that is another one that's going into the poultry forest. Got more mulberry. These are Elaeagnus ebbingi. They are a close relative of autumn olive, so it's a nitrogen fixer. You know, it's evergreen. These load of cuttings I took last year, you can see that quite a few of them have taken, and a lot of the others that don't look like they have, they're leafing out a little bit. So it's been quite a really good success rate, because we can't have too many of them. They're a really useful one. And next to them we have another evergreen. You wouldn't know it, but another evergreen nitrogen fixer. This is wax myrtle. Yeah, we had a really bad spell of weather just after they were brought out, and they've really suffered, you can see. So I'm hoping quite a few of them pull through, but we've got another load of seed in as well. Now they give you seed with a wax coating that when you simmer it in water, you can skim off a significant amount of wax. And it's effectively better than beeswax, and of course it's vegan friendly. Not that I am, but you know, it's vegan friendly. So it's a natural tree source of waxes. So yeah, amazing potential for this. So we got quite a lot of them. Comes in a couple of forms of different heights. We got a mix of both here because it was a mixed pack of seeds. The new ones we've got, we know, are the shrubbier form, the lower version of it, which will again fit in better as the understory, and being evergreen, it'll give us protection through the winter as well. And next to it, they've again had a tough winter, but these are seed buckthorn, and these are imported seed I got from the US, and I got some more of them. You can see they're just taking now quite nicely, and these are just in their second year. So put them in pots to give them a bit more love this year, because yeah, they've had a tough winter. But there's more here, you can see in the next tray over. They're a really interesting tree, interesting plant. So inside the greenhouse we've got a couple of other things that are eventually for the forest system. That is a Pakistani giant mulberry. Out of the whole packet of seeds, one tuck. So we're keeping that inside until it's plenty big enough to go outside. This little tiny one there, again, is a sole survivor. That's a Japanese raisin tree, which is an amazing tree. I've grown it before and then had most of them die. I've got one survivor, which is outside, but this early in the year still, it hasn't properly leafed out yet. It doesn't particularly like cold winds, so these are basically being grown for going down into the crater garden, which is one of the more sheltered spots. It's an amazing tree, really striking looking, and the fruit is a tiny little like bead looking thing on the end of a really quite a large fleshy stalk that looks like a deformed hand little thing. I'm selling it, aren't I? And that's meant to have like a bergamot pear kind of flavour. So yeah, that's going to be really interesting if we can get it to take, because yeah, none of this is guaranteed, but we're trying. Now here's the wax myrtle seedlings. You can see them little tiny ones. Very fast growing though. They'll be up to 6 inches by the end of this year. Behind that we got some staghorn sumac seedlings, which again is generally considered a pioneer tree. Grows like a weed, but I tried getting live plants through the post a couple of times. None of them survived, so I gave up on that and just grow it from seed. And you can see they're doing really well. Again, that was one I stratified over the winter and just sowed out this spring, and we got loads of them. And again, edible berry. You can use it to, flavour drinks and to make a spice and so on. It's got a lemony kind of flavour. Basically, it's a lemon substitute, and because it's got that amazing red colour to it on the berry cluster, on the drupe, you got that colour. So, like, lemon chicken that's bright red. That sounds pretty good. Here we've got a damson cutting. Very difficult to do from seed, but cuttings do occasionally take, and we've had 1 out of 4 certainly take. Another one, possibly, but that one seems to have definitely taken. So yeah, Damson's a really useful one. It's a really nice tree to have for, you know, obviously for the fruit. We're also working on the vining layer. It's too windy here for these yet, but once the shelter built's in place, we should have propagated enough of them by cuttings to have taken. This is a hardy kiwi, which should do okay here if we can give it enough protection, and even if it just survives, you know, it's more diversity into the shelter belt, and we might get a bit of fruit off it eventually. But we will get some named cultivar versions as well. That'll be, you know, more higher yielding potentially, for more in towards the more intensely harvested stuff, like in, you know, the garden around the greenhouse. But this is being brought on in the greenhouse. You can see we've got trellis in place for it, just to take it across the top there. We got more across the other side of the greenhouse, just to get enough, plenty of cutting material to really bring it on for putting it through the shelter belt. And underneath it, just because I didn't have anywhere else to stick them at the time, I got a couple of walking onions. I got more over here, which you can see they're just starting to do their trick. Amazing things, walking onions. Instead of creating, you know, a flower head that creates seeds, they grow little tiny bulbils at the end. You can see the little tiny onions just down there like little sets, but they've actually sprouted. Apparently sometimes those little ones will attack again. They'll form a bulb on the end themselves and they'll form little sprouts. But you can see they're doing really well. We've got a lot of multiplication going on all of them. And that's the idea, that's why we're keeping them in the greenhouse, just to bring them on really. I got some outside as well, but it's just to duplicate them, so we got enough so that when it comes time to put the understory in the forest garden areas, we got enough of them to do so. We're also working on the mid-story. These are black currant. They're from Ben Hope, these ones. We bought a batch of them last year, really gave them a good year in pots, and then took a load of cuttings, and that's these. I think we had maybe 2 fail. I mean, they're really easy to do from cuttings, as currants are, but yeah, with named cultivar things like currants, you don't need to buy them by the dozen. Just buy a few and then, you know, divide them up and away you go. We got 2 or 3 of them, and what I've done is all the variations of them I've got around on this berm behind the paddy field, so that obviously that's, you know, right next to my garden, my zone 1, where I spend a lot of time, or will be. I mean, it's all still in construction at the minute, of course. So when I see that the ones on the swale are ready for harvest, I know that I can go out into the zone 3 and 4, and I know that I can get them by the kilo, pick them by the bucket load. But it saves me walking up the field just to check which fruit's in. I can just check as I'm doing my morning chores, checking on the birds and so on. You can see here, that's the older Japanese raisin tree. It's only a year old. It's quite big. I need to give them all a bit of care and attention. Here we got a flowering quince, which does produce a fruit. It's just not something you'd eat out of hand. It's got quite a sour fruit, quite a hard fruit, but if you chuck it in a blender with water, it's meant to give a really nice lemonade kind of drink. I like the thought of that. So I've got quite a few of them to go into the understory as well. This bigger one, that's an overstory plant. That is checkers. I got it here just to see whether it would do okay. They seem to be really loving it. Yeah, you can't kill it with a stick. I mean, it's thriving. So we're probably going to get some more of them. Oops. Got some more flowering quince, and then below that, where we go? Here we go. That's giant bamboo that I brought on from seed. I've just started weeding them. Obviously they're not going to go into the ground because they'll run rampant. I've got other plants for them in another earthwork that hasn't even been built yet. So yeah, not going into that. See all these 2 trays, they're all a load of hawthorn cuttings that we took last winter. About a quarter of them have taken, so that's been fairly successful, considering, I mean, it was free, it sticks in the ground. And because that's the main component of most of the hedgerows around here, it's nice to put some in, and the wildlife benefits of having it are huge. And of course you can graft other things to them, like pears and so on. Next up we've got holly, which again take fairly readily from cuttings. So we've got a combination of male and female cultivars, so that eventually we will get and again that's to go into the shelter belt as part of its evergreen layer. So eventually there'll be a multi-layered shelter belt around the whole croft, and at the core of that will be evergreen species of different height depending on how much shade they're going to cast, depending on where they are in the landscape. So to the south of us we'll keep the lower shrubbier ones, and we'll see the bigger ones to the north, and they'll take their place in that because first off it's a really hardy species, but also if you've got really nice holly with berries, that's actually got value come winter. It's people go out of the way to buy it, for Christmas and all of that. Yeah, these are the rest of the sea buckthorn that look healthier than those over there, even though they've been more neglected. There's a lesson in there. So these need potting on carefully, because I want as many of them to survive as possible. So that's another little job to do. And in the last crate we've got these little pots as survivors of a load of black locust, and we've only got a couple of survivors and they're just about to start leafing out now. I need to plant another load up really, but they got hammered. But we are going to grow a lot more of them, and the tray that they're sitting on, again, something I only bought one of because it's a blackberry. This is a thornless variety, so you're not going to, oops, there you go. It's a thornless variety, so you're not going to shred yourself while you're picking it, but also if you're going through your system and you see blackberry vines that have got thorns on, that's a feral one, you can get rid of it, because if your named cultivar ones are all thornless varieties, you can spot the difference between them, in the dark. So yeah, it just makes things much simpler to keep it on top of it. And this we're going to introduce throughout the entire shelter belt, just because it's blackberry, it goes rampant, and you can't have too many blackberries, can you? These are potential trees, they're not even trees yet. I've tried this 3 times. These are the best seed that I've had so far, so I'm quietly optimistic we might get 1 or 2. These are the Pawpaw. It's a cool temperate relative of the custard apple. These are seeds of named cultivars, so they stand a decent chance of being something that's one of the more delicious forms of it. But it sounds like an amazing tree. It's obviously I've never eaten it because it was Pawpaw in the UK. It's an understory species, but does like having access to the canopy, access to good light while it's young to get up to size, or it won't really thrive when it's little. So once they're up to a few feet, we'll consider putting them out. It's a big if. I mean, this is seeds in the ground still. So they were stratified, and then they've come out and they were planted out a few days ago. And I say it's the best chance we've had for them yet, so I'm quietly optimistic. But we'll see. There's a lot of ifs in there. So that's it, warts and all. Some of it a little bit neglected, not looking great, but I kept it in, because that's the reality of it. Not everything takes brilliantly. Some things don't get looked after quite as well as you'd intended, because there's always 100 other things demanding your attention. But yeah, the simplest way, if cost is a factor that's stopping you from doing something on a slightly larger scale, then don't do it the expensive way. It's better to do it in 2 or 3 years than to not do it at all. So that's basically what we've done. Yeah, hope some of that's been useful.